You are tuning in to the Ayatollahs of Gnosis, here at the shipwreck that is called Aeon Arcanum podcast. This Februarius the 21st, the year of our Demiurge 2013, proudly seducing young virgins one church at a time, broadcasting live from that speck of broccoli in the pearly white porcelain thrones of Joel Osteen's mouth. More shit comes out of there than goes in. This is the AA for your soul. Aeon Arcanum is not funded by archontic entities, nor do we accept sacrifice. We're here to slap the hylic Kool-Aid taste out of your mouth. Stay tuned to remain in your ignorance. Know yourself before you run your mouth. All right, let's do it. Let's go. Start her off.
I like Miguel Connor's little intro. Well, he was discussing on his Aeon Byte show. He goes, and the deeper we go into the vaginas of possibility, and the outer rectums of reality, right into the inner sanctums of gnosis. All the time wear the rubber gloves of daring and strap-ons of eternal curiosity. It's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. I think that's what we do. I think that's our.
And I actually screwed up on the intro because I couldn't figure out where I put the paper and I couldn't remember how I worded it. But I was supposed to say, "Help Sophia get up when she falls down. She's very old and fragile and may have broke her hip."
Yeah, we need to heal her, restore her.
Yeah. So that's the restoration. There's a lot of ideas on Gnosticism embedded in our intros there, but you know.
I think in our last video we had a lot of trouble as far as the static. I think what
it's
was
not
wrong
doing that now, thank God.
Yeah, thank God. Thank the ascetic savior.
They're like, thank God. Oh, but you're a Gnostic. Which one? I don't know. All 32 of them. Fucking. Thanks for the snarky Orthodox remark.
365 Aeons.
Right. Broadcasting live 360 days a year. No.
Yeah.
Stupid. Like we're back in the fucking Thoth cycle.
Yeah. So last episode we were talking about Docetism, and we kind of went on and on about it. But I think we should just kind of recap what we talked about maybe for like 10 minutes, and then we can just like go on to another subject from there.
We're gonna recap it. Okay, the way we're going to do this is basically that episode was like 2 hours and 2.5 hours long because of all the problems we were having, and I kept getting a migraine because the mics kept messing up. Now that's not happening, so that's why we went off on tangents, because really I literally was developing a migraine while we were doing it, but we wanted to get the show done. What I'll be willing to do is if you really, really want to see that episode, because you liked the first one or something, and the second one drove you crazy from all the noise, I'd be willing to make you a transcript of the video, and or at least most of it, any of the important points. I'll make a transcript, so just private message me or leave a comment or something on this video, and I'll send you one. I don't know when I'll have it done, but I'm only going to make it if I get a request. But yeah, so we'll just go over the basics of Docetism. Sorry. So. Alex, what is Docetism?
Well, the word Dokian, it comes from the word Dokian. It's a Greek word. Mm-hmm. It means to appear or to be apparent. And a lot of different groups back then, which not just agnostics, you have a lot of the early Christian, even a few Jewish groups kind of believed that that their incarnation of Christ was more apparent rather than real, as in the sense of being a literal physical incarnation where he's born of a virgin, and all that kind of stuff, and then he physically dies and he physically resurrects, and I think that's basically denied in Gnosticism. There is no physical resurrection. There is no virgin birth. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the Orthodox pretty much condemned the so-called the heresy of the Docetists.
Right.
But when we read stuff like Corinthians or Philippians by Paul, I mean there are some ascetic ideas, pretty much written, or like it's basically kind of spelled out in it. I mean, like he talks about how the flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God.
Right.
I mean, and then he also kind of goes into this idea of the cross uh, being integral to his theology, and of course that theology is kind of pretty much carried on to the Gnostics. The Gnostics they viewed the crucifixion as pretty much fundamental to what they view as liberation from the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Valentinus, he talks about it in the Gospel of Truth. You see that in other so-called Sethian texts like Second Treatise of the Great Seth.
And then the treatise on the resurrection has
talks about it. Yeah, and the Gospel of Judas, which is something I also kind of want to go over a little bit before we go into another subject. Yeah. I mean, there's other texts in the Nag Hammadi that kind of poo-poos that idea, like Melchizedek, which is a Sethian text, which is interestingly enough, but it was very anti-Docetic in its ideas because it.
Yeah, that's a very Sethian text.
Yeah, and it says like, well, if people say that he didn't die, but he actually did, and I mean, it kind of goes on this long treatise against Docetism, but
right, and the treatise on the resurrection is interesting because it says the resurrection is real.
Right.
But it's an illusion. The world's an illusion.
The world is an illusion, but the resurrection is real because the resurrection is the pleroma, is the form.
Right. The resurrection is a return to being made of purely spiritual matter. And the word physical is interesting too because it'd be more accurate to say that they didn't believe in the carnal resurrection. They did believe that there were physics in the spiritual world. They just weren't material. They were quantum physics, if you want to call it anything.
Yeah.
But, at least in a modern sense.
But it's like they radically reinterpreted the crucifixion doctrine from Orthodoxy.
Right. Right. The crucifixion wasn't some atonement to please an angry God. It was more like a ransom to save people from the devil, who is the Yahweh of the Old Testament, and to save them from matter. And you gotta. It's hard to look at the Gnostics, especially the Docetists, and not. Contemplate the idea. Well, were they a suicide cult? And then you find hints of that in the gospel where they're asking Jesus, "Oh, does he mean he's going to commit suicide?"
Right.
But none of them committed suicide. It's actually virtually unknown that any of them ever did because they never say anything about it. No church father ever goes, "Oh man, that's a suicide cult."
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't say that Savior killed himself for.
They definitely would have. They would have said it. In fact, the only two people that killed themselves were borderline Orthodox, and that was in the Montanist group.
Right.
That was Priscilla and Montanus actually hung themselves like Judas. That's the only time you ever find the church fathers talking about anyone even remotely heretical committing suicide, and they didn't have any of the beliefs that any of the real heretical groups had, except for the Cerinthian, general resurrection idea. Which is really just Egyptian. It's not, a hallmark of Cerinthus per se.
Well, like the author of the second treatise of Seth, he could pretty much saying that Christ defeated the archons or the devil by duping them into nailing the body to the cross, which manifested their ignorance and brought knowledge to those who were spiritually dead.
Right, and the cross is often seen as representative of the tree of life, and the Eucharist is the fruit of the tree of life. And the Eucharist fell from the tree of life, which had Jesus in it, and that's why they talk about, Sophia became the tree of life, and this and that. And there's even times where Sophia and the Logos overlap, and Sophia is the Logos, or Sophia just doesn't exist at all, and the Logos usurped her. And you find a lot of that in the Nag Hammadi library and in the patristic polemics.
Right. And there's also this idea that, Christ was kind of like, couldn't be seen by the powers and the principalities. So basically the angels were the obstacles.
And in our estimate, that's kind of what we believe possibly is how it started. We kind of think that really this idea of Docetism and all these other things are kind of something the church fathers came up with to kind of parody the more mythical beliefs that the Gnostics held, And so, like the idea of Docetism is the idea that Jesus couldn't appear to the archons, and well, archons also could mean Pilate and Herod and all them. So they said, oh well, he didn't appear to the, Christ didn't appear to them, but that's because they made Jesus into Christ. So, the only archons in the Orthodox scheme of things are somehow they still have angels, but the only things that are called archons are living authorities, physical, carnal authorities. And so, oh, Christ didn't appear to Pilate? Oh, what do you mean Pilate didn't slay him? Clearly he was talking to him. Oh, he only appeared to be alive. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So that's an Orthodox way of looking at it. And then the thing with Sophia, even the idea where they accuse Gnostics of ritual orgies and things like that. They have orgy practices. Right. They said, well, the pagans do it, so Gnostics believe in multiple gods. They must be doing it too. And then at first, it was just an attack on the idea that Sophia was a whore that had sex with more than one Aeon. So, Sophia clearly, fucked Pronoia or whatever. I don't know, whoever. And then she got down with Carpistes, and then she had lesbian love with Ecclesia or something. I don't know. I mean, like, they looked at her like, wow, she must be a whore. They must be having orgies in heaven. I mean, on earth, because they don't believe in heaven. They don't believe in God. They're Sadducees. I mean, this is really Docetism. It's almost like it's a figment of the Orthodox imagination.
Well, I mean, it's kind of but they definitely have a very wrong idea of what the Gnostics believe as far as Docetism goes. Right. They definitely interpret it in a weird kind of stupid way. I mean, the basic message of Docetism is that the crucifixion wasn't really the death of Christ. It was actually the powers. It was like a victory of Christ rather than the defeat. The Catholics, they always historically interpret it as Christ consenting to defeat so that he could serve as a human sacrifice for atonement of sins.
Right. For the Gnostic, it's more of the Christus Victor theory originally, which is still the Greek Orthodox theory. They're still minorly Gnostic.
Yeah, and all these texts like Judas and Seth and Apocalypse of Peter, I mean, it all criticizes this Catholic idea.
Oh yeah.
Of Christ dying for the sins of humanity, which the Gnostic would probably say, no, that's not the case.
Yeah. So what is one of the Gnostic beliefs when it comes to Jesus Christ? How do they view what before Jesus was born and he was born like the rest of us, or whether he was born like the rest of us or not? What was he? What is the spirit-flesh dichotomy? How does that apply to Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus?
Well, the Gnostics, or a lot of groups that were influenced by them, they considered Jesus Christ basically, almost God. I mean, they overemphasized the divine part and didn't really focus too much on the human part, but the Gospel of Thomas, of course, goes into that quite a bit. As far as the human side and the divine side of Jesus, of course, as I said earlier, they didn't believe in the virgin birth or the physical resurrection. And of course, the Gospel of John kind of goes into that and says, that Christ came down to illuminate the world and to save the sinners, the condemned. He didn't come here to judge the world, but yeah, there is definitely a lack of
right, and then suddenly in Revelation, he's the judge.
Yeah, Revelation. Yeah, he's the judge of the souls of men, and it completely reverses the role of Christ.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that
it even redefines the judgment seat of Christ from Paul.
Yeah, we talked about that in the last time. Like the whole judgment seat. I think that might have been added. Scribe, perhaps.
Now, when it comes to his nature, though, what I mean is, what is this theory of this pre-existence idea?
Oh, the pre-existence. Well,
yeah. How did they express that?
Well, Christ was originally basically seen as an Aeon, and kind of like Sophia. Sophia is an Aeon, and we have different Aeons in what is called the Pleroma. And the Pleroma is a Greek word for fullness. In a lot of the different Gnostic texts, like the Apocryphon of John, it talks about Christ being sort of the brother or husband of Sophia.
Yeah.
Or wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So when Sophia falls, when she beholds the ultimate God, like she longs for this ultimate God like the other Aeons do, and but somehow during this process where she wants to gain entry into the mysteries of the ultimate God, she falls from grace, which is a little bit like the whole idea of Lucifer, trying not so much trying to usurp the ultimate God, but I guess to kind of gain the immortal, the ultimate mysteries of
in some
the Lord.
schemas, she becomes the serpent. She goes into the serpent.
Yeah, she becomes
right.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that the Orthodox would say, "Hey, that's why Lucifer is Satan."
Right.
Yeah.
So they kind of misinterpret, like Lucifer, of course, Lucifer. What is Lucifer? I mean, it's like
it's like the light bringer,
it's the Venus,
in a way.
Light bringer.
Yeah. Prometheus type figure.
Yeah.
If anything, he's Prometheus. I mean, Lucifer is the most Promethean character in the whole Bible.
Yeah,
I don't even know who else to equate him with. Most Luciferians equate him with Prometheus.
Right. And in the same way, I mean, a Christ is kind of like. I know I'm kind of going into a book.
Well, Christ was a derogatory term too. It meant smeared in shit.
Yeah. Samaritan shit?
Smeared in shit, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Well, I know it's a chrism. I mean, it's like the anointed one, but
Christian even meant to be trampled on and stuff like that because you got dirt all over you and everything. Is probably a reference to the people they were killing in the arenas and shit.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I don't know if that answered your question, but I mean, as far as Christ being the logos, I mean, that's
so he's this spiritual being that came into the flesh.
Yeah, he basically sacrificed his spiritual self to enter into the material world, or the world of flesh.
Yeah.
In order to redeem the souls of humanity, the idea of Simon Magus redeeming the whore, his whore, Helen, and then
Helena.
Helena
Blavatsky.
Well, maybe not.
She was Helena Troy. Then she was Helena the prostitute, who is strangely a lot like Mary Magdalene, who had Sophia in her, who was brought back as Helena Blavatsky in the 1800s. No, I mean he had the reincarnation idea. He had an idea which we're gonna go into a little bit about how basically the whole Gnostic mythos is basically just there's no spirituality to it. It's all carnal. It's really just a medical text that basically about being born and all this weird stuff. But then when it comes to Docetism though, they also Eusebius talks about how there was this group that Hippolytus mentioned that they started on Cyprus. The island of Cyprus, which is off the coast of modern-day Turkey and Israel. And there's a guy named Serapion of Antioch. I don't know. I've never found out whether this Serapion of Antioch is from Pisidia Antioch or Syrian Antioch, but I think it's Syrian Antioch. And anyway, they're both close enough, and they're probably about the same distance away from Cyprus. But so he came to Cyprus and he found him using the Gospel of Peter. And the Gospel of Peter was more popular than the Gospel of Mark, as Bart Ehrman mentions. And even the Gospel of Mark, which is thought to be highly docetic, was probably originally a Carpocratian gospel that Clement of Alexandria was actually protesting against, which is interesting. But they talk about this Docete group, and one of their doctrines is the idea that Jesus didn't suffer and things like that, and they'll say things like that. But Jesus not suffering, what does that mean if Jesus and Christ are separate? To say that Jesus didn't suffer, would that be an accurate statement for a Docetist or not?
As far as his suffering. I mean,
who suffered?
It kind of depends, though. It wasn't. Well, they believe that Christ didn't suffer. They believe Jesus suffered.
Right. They believe Jesus didn't suffer.
Yeah, Christ is an immortal spirit, so how can he suffer?
So you can already see right there what the Orthodox are doing. The Orthodox they admit that they separate Christ and Jesus, but the Orthodox aren't willing to admit that the Logos is Christ. They want to say Jesus is Christ and the Logos isn't, which really doesn't make any sense how the Logos could affect any salvation if the Logos isn't also Christ. And Paul actually talks about that. He calls Christ Jesus. When he refers to Christ Jesus, he's referring to the spiritual aspect of Christ, the Word of God. And when he refers to Jesus Christ, he's referring to the physical, carnal Jesus.
Right, the man. Right.
And anytime he says Christ, it represents that, and Jesus is his body.
Mm-hmm.
But he still very much sees the Logos as being called Jesus, just like the Valentinians do,
Mm-hmm.
and I think even the Nahashins notice that. But
yeah,
there's that. So
it's kind of interesting. When you look at the New Testament Gospels, you have Jesus who redeems Mary Magdalene, who was considered a whore and an adulteress by the Jews back then, and he redeems her. He rolls with her in the mires of depravity. Like, you have this idea that the Savior has to go into the mires of filth and decay.
He has to roll in the mud with the pigs.
Yeah, in order to redeem the pearl from because the pigs will basically kind of ignore it or even trample upon it. So
and what's interesting with the pigs, when they fly, when he exorcises the demons from them, when they go running off the cliff, well, they ran into water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they didn't die.
They didn't die. Yeah,
they got baptized. The pigs were actually baptized. I'm serious. Dead serious. That's exactly what it's saying in the text.
Huh. So they didn't
die at all. A lot of people use that, like John Armstrong and all these atheists or deists. Somehow he's a deist, but he's an atheist. Go figure how that even makes any fucking sense. But yeah, like he said in like his book, and even in comments that he'll leave on stuff. He has an ebook, but he'll leave comments. Oh man, the Bible is full of atrocities. Even the New Testament. God, Jesus is evil. He sent pigs off of a cliff to die.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it doesn't actually say that, but okay. So,
but, there's so many different forms of Docetism, which like the Monophysite or the Nestorians, and
right?
The
Church of the East, right?
Yeah, we can.
They're still around.
On and on about it. Yeah, we can go on and on about it, but I think it might bore our audience to death.
But anyway, yeah. So if you wanna get any kind of thorough, detailed explanation or book recommendations on Docetism or anything like that, feel free to send me a private message or leave a comment on this video or on my YouTube page on the comment section, and I'll be happy to send you some information on it. But right now we're gonna get off of that subject. There's a hell of a lot more to it. But we'll get off that subject and we'll move on to archaeological finds in the 20th century, and I guess we could start out with the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Nag Hammadi Library, and maybe Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, the finds there. If we could kind of go into that, that'd be great. Do you know what years these were found, or maybe what was found there? What's something that stands out about these finds to you?
The Dead Sea Scrolls were found in Qumran, which is I think it's an area near the West Bank, I believe. I don't know. I kind of forget. Or maybe I think it's near Palestine. I think
it's on the Jordan.
Jordan? Okay.
Yeah, it's on the Jordan River. It's in the south. It's pretty close to it. It's right by where John was baptizing. Pretty much, it's where Qumran is.
Well,
and they found a lot of different caves too.
Yeah, it's a collect. It's like there's quite.
I think it's 11 caves. 11. Yeah. It might have been more than that. The latter caves weren't very important. No, they didn't really have much.
Well, I mean, the first Dead Sea Scroll was actually found right at the same time the Nag Hammadi texts were found. Right, like I think it was like 1946, 1947, I believe.
I think it's 45, I thought, but yeah, it's somewhere around there.
Somewhere around there, yeah. I mean, there's like the dates keep changing to whoever you talk to, but
yeah.
But I think it ended. I think there was like a period of discovery as far as those texts were concerned.
Yeah.
I think it ended in 1956, I believe.
Yeah, probably around there. It was, which is about the time my mom was born. Yeah, they were definitely. It was a long process of discovery for Qumran, and also for the Nag Hammadi Library. The Nag Hammadi Library, what people need to keep in mind is that the Nag Hammadi Library was not found by archaeologists. It wasn't found in the same way that a lot of the stuff at Qumran was found. was not found by professionals. It was found by people that were they say they were Bedouins, but really almost all Bedouins are tomb robbers. These people were just like tomb robbers who played out their story like they were Bedouin, probably.
Right.
So a lot of the stuff that's in, I mean, you had something like, what was it, 12 codices. All these were found in the black market, by the way, in Cairo, and some of them were even found in Europe by rich collectors and stuff like that. There almost none of the Nag Hammadi stuff has the same, like one text rarely has the same story as the other text. One text is found from somebody keeping it in a safety deposit box, like Judas, right? One which is very much probably was part of the Nag Hammadi library, and then you got another text is found by some, Bedouins who sold it to some place, and Muhammad Ali, that whole story, which really doesn't add up mostly, but that's the popular story. Some of it was found by I think it was like a rich Greek lady who collected antiquities. I don't remember if she was Greek or not, but she was someone in Europe. She was collecting antiquities and books and actually refused to sell the codex for the longest time, the one she had. And then you had the codex with, I think it was Allogenes in it, right? Or no, Marsanes. That whole codex was burnt.
Right.
The entire thing, except for what's left of Marsanes. And part of Codex, I think, 13, I think, or all of it almost was burnt. There's a couple codexes that were almost entirely burnt, because they, I guess they used to wrap camel shit in those and they'd burn them.
Yeah, I think what I read, I think the wife or I don't know, I think it was the mother of Muhammad Ali that found the jars.
Yeah.
I think he used it to just kind of to fire up her stove or oven to make whatever. So I don't know.
Yeah, and they did it with camel shit.
Yeah.
And then they didn't want to open them originally, as the story goes, because they thought they had a genie,
right,
inside of them. Which, in Western culture, we're like, ooh, opening a lamp with the genie, that's awesome. Genies are not. You don't want fucking with genies is like fucking with Satan in their culture. Genies are very much the devil in their culture. Like for us, if we ran into a genie, we're like, yeah, we get 3 wishes. But keep in mind the Western idea: when you make a deal with the devil, you sell your soul to the devil. That's what you do to a genie. That's why you don't want to open the lamp, because you have to make the wish. And it's actually only 1 wish. It's not 3. It's exactly the same as the Satan myth. The myth we have about Satan, like where we're like, ooh, if you interact with Satan and you make 1 wish, and he gives you that wish, but then he takes something really precious from you, like everything precious from you for that one thing. That's exactly like the genie mythos. That's they didn't want to touch it. They were scared. Eventually they decided they would break them open because, they needed money, and they knew that they could sell these in Cairo, and Cairo would be willing to pay a lot for them. And a lot of the texts they didn't sell because they couldn't get enough money for them. They even had one guy who, when he finally did buy the text, he was trying to sell them for, I don't know, something to a couple $1 million. He was trying to make way more than they were worth, and he didn't let people properly examine them. And I think that might have been the Gospel of Judas. But when they were examining him, they made him an offer, and he's like, nope, forget it. And he threw it, I think it was Judas, and he threw it back in the safety deposit box. And he's like, you're not paying enough. And eventually he got desperate. He wanted the money. He's like, all right, I'll sell it. And by that time, it was almost decayed. And what about what you were saying before about they have new scraps of Judas that are being translated?
Yeah, I think according to Miguel on the show, he's saying that there are some unpublished scraps of the Judas that is still being translated to this day. So it's not a finished work.
Yeah,
which I find pretty interesting. I think I'm kind of curious what else it has to say. I mean, it's just like,
I wonder what they are, where they fill in, because they can't be from the end. They have to be from the beginning of the gospel. Right. I think it's going to be a Last Supper type discourse. I bet that's in there. I bet money on it.
And and the Judas is like probably one of the most interesting out of all the so-called Sethian texts, or it might be even Canaanite texts, because like the archons aren't created. I can't go back to the archons, but they aren't created simply by as an accident or sort of deliberate.
Yeah, they're not just emanations.
Rebellion of Yaldabaoth. I mean, they're actually created by one of the four luminaries, which is Elilith, which is like
right. Elilith is the most important of the luminaries.
Yeah, to the Sethian tradition.
So you had Armazel, or Harmazel, or Harmogenes is what he's called sometimes, and Armogenes, depending on whether you're reading. Yeah, depending on whether you're reading Irenaeus or you're reading the actual text. Then you had David or Davithai, Oriel or Uriel, and then Elilith. Those are the four luminaries. So what do you think those are? Those luminaries?
Well, those four luminaries. I mean, they're kind of like Aeonic angels. I want to say.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not bad angels. They're basically angels sent from the Pleroma, but they're there to kind of in this.
Are they material, or are they just like are they docetic? Like, can they take on flesh, or take on some kind of matter? Like, that's what I'm not entirely clear on with them.
No, with them, I think they're pictured as they definitely take on imagery. Like you see, actually no, let me take that back. I'm trying to think. I know in the hypostasis of the archons, I think the Elilith projects an angel of fire, but I don't think that counts.
Right. And the luminaries are also taken up by the Zoroastrians, or the Zoroastrian Manichaean, should I say? But the luminaries, they appear in maybe I think about 7 of the Nag Hammadi texts. 7 of them are staunchly Sethian.
Right.
And the Gospel of Judas being included, which I don't know why they don't include I think the only reason the Gospel of Judas isn't included in the Nag Hammadi library is because only because it wasn't. They think it wasn't found by Ali and them, but the truth is they don't know really anything about this guy, and it definitely could have been part of the find. It has the letter of Peter to Philip. It has another Allogenes text. It has 4 texts. It doesn't smack of something found at Oxyrhynchus. It totally smacks of Nag Hammadi. No, I think it was part of the Nag Hammadi library. None of the scholars will agree with me on that, but whatever.
Well, I mean, to answer your question, I don't know if Elilith is like pictured as an actual entity. I think it might have been. I think it might be kind of a golden. I imagine it's kind of a golden figure, maybe. I'm trying to. Let me look it up right now. Let me see.
Yeah, Elilith is definitely the most mentioned luminary, and some texts that only mention him. I think he's in he's in the Norea mythos.
He's kind of like he basically is there to. He's kind of like a John the Baptist figure. He's there to kind of introduce the Savior. I guess he's kind of like the pre-Savior figure. If that makes sense, I don't.
Right, this stuff seems like it's Cainite to me, though. All of it. Because this all kind of comes from the group that Irenaeus seems to see as Cainite.
Yeah, Cain.
Or the others. The others. No, it's not a movie with Nicole Kidman. Which is actually a trippy ass movie.
Which movie is this?
The Others.
The Others. I haven't seen that movie.
It's one of my favorite movies ever.
Okay, I need to watch.
It's got a weird Gnostic thing going to it. It makes you believe things aren't really what they seem like at the beginning. I'll give you that. I'm not going to spoil it, but if you haven't seen it, definitely see The Others with Nicole Kidman in it. Pretty good movie. Kind of Gnostic in some ways, some creepy ways. You'd have to be very Gnostic to spot in it what's particularly Gnostic about it, but it's definitely the person that made it is definitely not a Gnostic. They just used Gnostic stuff without knowing it.
That's usually the case, right? In a lot of fiction movies, like even that movie Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise. Like I had a dream about that. Yeah. That I was actually Tom Cruise, and I was in a dream world. And sure enough,
Wow, you had a dream that you were rich and good looking.
Yeah, I had a dream.
I'm like, man, I'm good looking and rich. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. But well, I know I am good looking, but that's besides the point. No, but seriously, no. But it's kind of interesting how I have a dream about a movie that's basically a dream world, a character in a dream, and it's just like a dream within a dream. It's just like really weird. I don't know why I dreamt about that, even though I never haven't watched it. At least
you didn't dream you were Joel Osteen.
Joel Osteen.
God, I remember when I found that crap sitting on my mom's coffee table and I threw it.
Oh my gosh.
They looked at me all pissed. We paid for that. Good. I'm fucking burn it. Piss on it. I'm gonna piss and put the fire out.
Joel Osteen is basically the secret for Christians, basically.
Yeah, I was like, dude, get this out of my fucking house, please. Just having this in here is enough to make the God above gods kill me.
The Archons might just kind of go clap for you for that.
Right.
But going back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, I know Robert Eisenman has a lot of really interesting theories about it.
Right.
I mean, I think
he's been to the Dead Sea Qumran caves.
Yeah,
They say he was. I've heard a lot of stuff saying that he was one of the people that found the later scrolls, but I really don't know if that's true or not.
Maybe.
He actually teaches close to my house. I mean, he's in Long Beach, California. He's a professor at the university.
But
he was at one point.
He was, yeah. But I think he said something to the effect of that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by by Jewish Christians. That was led by James, who was a brother of Jesus. So I think
that is his belief. That's in his
belief.
James, the brother of Jesus, which is about 1,000 pages. Almost no publisher wanted to touch it because it's so long.
Right.
It's pretty well written. I've read about maybe 400 pages of it. It's a pretty good book. I have it on my Nook. You get it cheaper that way. Yeah, definitely an interesting book with a lot of pretty mild theories and then a couple outlandish ideas. His total thesis is pretty outlandish. Actually, his thesis, or part of what comes from his thesis, is that James is in fact Jesus.
Right.
Right. So he believes James is Jesus, and Paul was the enemy of James, and the Ebionite adoptionists are the true Christians, and
right.
Yeah, it's his theory.
Yeah,
he loves Muslims.
Yeah, he said that the Simon Magus is the teacher of deception in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is really Paul.
Right.
The Mandaeans also hate on Paul pretty bad in Christ. Right. So there's kind of a connection between those groups, I think.
Right. He goes heavy into that. It's not an expensive book for being that many pages either.
Yeah, and I think he talks about the wicked priest, which might be reference to Jesus. I mean, or Paul. Yeah,
and if you read Ahmed Osman, he has a completely different theory on that. Ahmed Osman, with his books on, I think it's Christianity in Egypt or something. He has a couple of books, and they're about how Christianity really goes back to about 1,600 years, roughly 13 to 1,600 years before the time of Jesus is actually when Christianity was founded. That's when Jesus actually lived, and he is Joshua. He is the successor to Moses. That's who he is, and he's also King Tut. That's his belief.
That's interesting.
He has his belief is probably the most far out there belief that I've ever come across. I did a video on my channel about it before, but I don't know. We can go over that another time.
Okay.
It's so his is so complicated. I mean, reading him is like reading Eisenman. It's really hard to follow, and there's a lot of chinks in his armor. Let's just put it that way. And by that, I don't mean I'm not making a racial comment.
Yeah, no. Chinks in armor, it's a different context entirely. Yeah.
They're not chinks in armor. They're chinks in his armor.
Yeah, it's like you put if you take out the word.
Yeah, take out one word, it's suddenly a racial slogan.
Something else. Yeah, no, we're definitely not racist. No, we love everybody equally. So
we hate them equally too.
We hate them equally too. So
we're here to provide equal opportunity hatred and love.
Love
from the hoplaroma of love.
Hoplaroma of love. So what do you think of the Essenes? Do you think they were the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
I don't think the Essenes were important at all.
Okay.
I think that the idea of Essene it's an interesting term because it's the Esseni actually in Greek, and the Esseni sounds a lot like Nahasheni. It could be that the Nahashians are the Essenes, and that the church fathers changed their word to say, oh, the serpent lovers or serpent worshippers or something. So by saying Nahash, serpent, scene, the second part of the word Essene, they took out the S and replaced it with Nahash, which is about the same, actually about as long. It's the same amount of letters, and so they swapped that out and they said, oh, they're Nahashians. So it could be that the Essenes are the Nahashin. That's possible. The Nahashin are probably, in all likelihood, the earliest Gnostic sect out of all of them, predating Marcion and Valentinus and Basilides and Simon Magus, all these people. But that's according to Hippolytus, and they were Hellenized Jews that were waiting some kind of Messiah figure who was from the spiritual realm, and they believed that they were from the spiritual realm and other stuff like this. But then there's, the Essenes are, when the scrolls were first found, the most important early finds for the scrolls are not the finds that Eisenman primarily had anything to do with. They were these finds, like the War Scroll. The War Scroll is probably the most famous, and the Damascus document. Those are the famous Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
And these are the scrolls that are uniquely Dead Sea Scrolls material. When people tell you, oh, a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls haven't been published, it's actually not true. Because the Dead Sea Scrolls that haven't been published in the Dead Sea Scrolls catalog are actually the copies of Isaiah, Habakkuk, whatever they found. Psalms, Deuteronomy, and Isaiah were the most important scrolls found at the Dead Sea or at Qumran. These are also by no mistake of, by no accident, I guess, according to Eisenman, it's no accident that those are the most important Old Testament books found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because they're also the most important Old Testament books referenced in the New Testament. Deuteronomy and Psalms and Isaiah are actually the basis for Christianity, at least the New Testament Christianity. So it very much is based on their interpretation of those. But the Essenes, according to Josephus, are very different than what the Qumran community embodies. The idea that there was one group inhabiting Qumran that wrote all the scrolls has been disproven several times. It's actually 100% false. There's no way they were written by one group. They were written by at least 2 or 3 groups in different time periods.
Right.
The Essene theory of Qumran has also been disproven several times by several competent scholars. Whether or not it's actually true or not, I have strong doubts, because I don't think we know. I don't know where they came up with the idea that we know this much about the Essenes. We really don't. It was based on the scholarship of that time period was based on the idea that, we've got this Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh, obviously it's going to have. Oh, obviously they were by Jesus. Obviously. Oh man, I mean, we found something dating from the first. Oh, it's by Jesus. That was the mentality of all the Orthodox Protestant scholars at the time, which they were almost all Protestants and Catholics. So whenever they found anything, they said, "Oh, it has to conform to the Bible. It has to be biblically correct." And this is what Israel Finkelstein and guys like him are against. Like, I understand that. I'm against that too, but I also don't go as radical as him to where I say, "Oh, well, all of these things have to be historically inaccurate." I don't believe that. I'm more in the moderate camp with everything in my life, basically, but except for Gnosticism, which I guess is radical. But looking at the Essenes, like they go, oh, they had this ritual bathing practice. Every Jew had a ritual bathing practice. It's not something that's specific to the Essenes. The Sadducees did it. The Pharisees did it. The Essenes did it. The Hemero-Baptists and all these other groups like the Docethians and all these people. It's like 7 groups that they talk about, and that's outside of the, Josephus. He's got 4 groups. He's got the Zealots, the Essenes, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, right? But other writers expand it. Hegesippus is thought to be an early chronicler, living around the time, I think it was a Pius or Anicetus, one of them, who was bishop of Rome in mid-2nd century. Eusebius in the 4th century tells us pretty much most of what we know about Hegesippus. And Hegesippus claims that there were 7 groups. So he had 7 groups with those three of those groups, except for the Zealots, combined in there. And then he had another. There was another belief by the Talmud. The Talmud tells us, well, there's Sadducees, Pharisees, there was these zealot types, and there was also there's a offshoot of the Sadducees as well. The Zealots were Pharisees that broke off, and the Sadducees had a group, but I can't remember what their name was. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head.
They were named after their leader, I think, kind of like how the later church fathers would name, like Valentinians are of Valentinus, Marcionites are of Marcion, et cetera, et cetera. So they had a group like that that's they don't mention anywhere else. It's only mentioned in the Talmud. So there's varying degrees of how people classified groups, but the Essenes, they're not the group that these people wanted them to be. They wanted them, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they wanted to say, oh, it's at Jordan. So they're all by John the Baptist. John the Baptist led this group. All this stuff has to do with him. It was automatically a preconceived notion that they had to do with John the Baptist group. Right. Simply not even because of the time period. This is before they even did anything with them. This is just finding them. And you'll hear a lot of things too, like when they talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh, we carbon dated this, we carbon dated that. The truth is they didn't carbon date anything from the Dead Sea. They might have carbon dated seeds and pieces of wood that they found around, which you can carbon date. But that doesn't prove anything. I mean, those could have carbon dated to the 13th century, and the scrolls could be from 10,000 years ago. It doesn't prove crap. You're carbon dating seeds. You can't carbon date the scrolls because you have to destroy the scrolls. You also need a big amount of them. You'd have to destroy a whole entire scroll to carbon date the scroll. Right. Some of the scrolls aren't even big enough. And what are you going to take pictures of? And then we're going to throw it into a carbon dating fluids and everything, and then we're going to carbon date it. Because the whole process of carbon dating has to do with destruction. You have to destroy the text. At the time, I mean, to photograph these scrolls is like a massive project now that they're doing and putting on the internet. And they've only got about 5 of them up. They got the Great Isaiah scroll and a couple other things. But you can see the original, and it unrolls in front of you. It's pretty cool. But to get cameramen to do that and to get it up online is probably one of the most expensive projects that's ever been done in scholarship. This is like a virtual Library of Alexandria going on here. And that's just 5 texts. Imagine if they could get every text on there, which is actually what they're shooting for in the future. Scholars want to be able to get everything up on a database. University of Michigan, the British Library, all these other stuff, get them all together. And that'll never happen in our time because it's all politic crap. Another thing has to do with discovery. Anytime you discover a papyrus or something, or a vellum manuscript, you're going to have to deal with all the politics that go into it. The black market, politics, religious politics.
Yeah, all these texts were pretty much plagued by politics. Like the Nag Hammadi was plagued by it. All these different texts that are outside the official canon, basically.
Right. Even you got to think that making the Library of Alexandria back in the day was all political too. Like if you wanted to even be allowed to come into Alexandria, and Achari S. pointed that out when she was talking to Miguel Conner, and I was surprised that when I listened to her on his show, she actually brings up points where I'm like, wow, she knows this, because most of the stuff she brings up when I hear her talk is like ridiculous. But she brought this up, and this is actually true. This is confirmed. I've seen this in a lot of documentaries and read about it before. And they would take all your texts away from you. That's how they built the Library of Alexandria. And by built it, I don't mean literally how they built it, but how they built up the text collection is by any time a ship pulled into the harbor, or someone came on the roads there and came into the city, they would take your texts away from you and they would copy them. They give you the copy and they would keep the original, which, you know, it's a bum deal for both sides, because why would I want to keep this rotting copy and give them the new one? And then at the same time, it's a rip-off for the guy that got it taken. He's like, I had the original, it's worth more money. Why do I want this new one? Because the guy in the ship is probably just looking to sell it. Well, the librarians are probably just looking to understand what it says. So they both screwed each other, ironically enough. But, you know, they wanted to have, like I said, they wanted to prove that John the Baptist was at the Dead Sea. So the earliest one's a teacher of righteousness. He's John the Baptist. The wicked high priest is Caiaphas. And then they pushed it back, and they wanted it to fit into this this idea that it was at the time of Alexandra or something like that. You know, like it was like 160 BC. Right. So you have the 160 BC theories with King Unias, and then you have where they relate it to the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans. And then you have the other idea where they want to relate it to the time of Jesus. And then you have Eisenman's idea where he wants to relate it to a little bit later to the time of James, you know, or it's to John, or it's this and that. The truth is, we don't know who the hell it is. So to make any of these comparisons, they never work. None of them have held up. It can't be Jesus. It can't be John. It can't be James. It can't be any of these people, because when we read different texts, we find things that contradict what we know about those people. You know, so then you're, you know, parachuting into this whole weird realm of fairies and unicorns. You know, and it's just a real problem.
Speaking of fairies and unicorns, what do you think of John Allegro's theory on the Dead Sea Scrolls?
I don't like John Allegro at all.
Yeah, he says that, you know, Christ, or Jesus Christ, is actually a code word for a mushroom. Or
yeah, John Allegro is full of shit. John Allegro is also a product of the same type of scholarship. It's preconceived scholarship. In other words, scientific hypotheses are not something where you state your conclusion first. This is how these guys practice scientific method wrong. They state their conclusion. Their conclusion is already, yes, Jesus wrote this. Jesus wrote it. He wrote it in 32 AD. I know he wrote it. It came from his house. He lived in Qumran. Okay, whatever. They come up with something like that. So now the whole thing is, instead of examining the evidence and seeing if it proves their conclusion based on their hypothesis, they examine the evidence for everything they can take out of it that proves what they're saying, and they dismiss everything that doesn't. And that's just bad scholarship. And that's actually, you'll find out about 90% of scholarship is bad scholarship, because it works that way.
Yeah,
that's politics.
There's a lot of preconceived notions and prejudices that go through reading these texts. So they kind of like, oh, well, you know, the Gnostics were pagans, neo-pagans, and you know, they love the earth and they love Gaia. Which
is funny, because Sophia is not a proper name at the time.
Yeah, it was just...
It is now, and Sophia becomes a proper name in Latin, not in Greek. And so, you know, the idea that, oh, it's Sophia, it's a lady's name. No, it's not. It's the connective words like verbs and, you know, whatever, pronouns and all this stuff that are connecting these words that make people say, oh, well, it says this, so it must be feminine. Well, it is stated in the feminine. But that doesn't mean that it's talking about a woman's name. Who's named Sophia at the time? Well, it's not even used as a proper noun. And so if it's not used as a proper noun, why would it indicate that it's talking about a person?
Right.
Or a god? Because in a pagan if they were pagans, well, when pagans talked about the gods, they talked about them as if they were people. Zeus was a guy that lived in the sky. You know?
Right.
Demeter lived in the sky. You know, all these gods, they lived in the sky, and they were people. They looked like people. You could touch them and feel them, but the thing is, they had a docetic nature where, you know, Zeus could turn into a goat. Zeus could turn into an old man. You know, if you even watch more of the modern movies that they're doing, like Immortals and all these stuff and Clash of the Titans, you know, then you're familiar. A lot of people are becoming more familiar with the Greek mythology again, like we were in the 80s. And you see this idea: Zeus becomes a goat, which would make him Satan because he's a goat, right?
Baphomet.
And he turns into an old man, and you know, and he does all this stuff, and he's a wandering old hermit. You know, he's the Platonic Socrates, and he's all these things. And so that's very common to see Zeus take on different forms, and Aphrodite become a different form. Even a snake can wrap around someone's wrist, and so the docetic implications are interesting. But the thing is that Jesus didn't in the docetic mythos. Jesus isn't going from being a physical being that looks like Zeus into being a physical being that looks like Jesus. Or from being a thing that looks like Jesus into a thing that looks like an asp. It's not the same thing, and so they're trying to say, oh, it's pagan because clearly it's Zeus turning into a goat.
Right.
And they'll do that. The patristic writers will do that,
Yeah, you see that aesthetic theme quite a lot in the ancient world. I mean, you see that and with Eve, like, in the... Well, let me go back to the Docetism again, but like, Eve turning into a tree when the Archons pursue her, the authorities pursue her, and they want to rape her and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And that's tied into the idea that Eve is Sophia and Jesus became a tree, and he became the tree of knowledge, and he's really Sophia because the Logos is Sophia, and you see all that stuff getting boggled together. Not in one particular text, but in if you were to just put all those texts together and go, oh, they all believe this, you'd actually come up with the idea that, well, they believe Jesus was every other thing in the cosmos. Right. Oh, and then you have Yezias Mazareus.
Mm-hmm.
Who's that? Jesus.
Jesus, yeah.
Of Nazareth. Mazareus becomes Nazareus. And then it becomes Nazara. And all this stuff. Originally, Jesus of Nazareth has nothing to do with coming from the town of Nazareth. It has to do with whatever Mazareus is. Child of the ethereal or something. Who the hell knows? What the fuck that means? I don't. Right. Scholars might. But it definitely had a different meaning to it. That's why the demons go, I know you, Jesus of Nazareth, not Jesus of Bethlehem, not Jesus of Galilee, Jesus Mazareus, Yezias. Yezias, not Zeus or Jesus or Yeshua. When you're drinking hylic Kool-Aid, Jesus is Yeshua or Yahoshua. Or who the hell are you? But with Josephus on the Essenes, here's what he says. He says the doctrines of the Essenes is this. So he outlines their doctrine. And he says that all things are best ascribed to God. So they said that everything is ascribed to God. What the hell does that mean? We don't know. We don't know what that means. There's all kinds of things that can mean. They teach the immortality of souls, which the Gnostics teach the immortality of souls in a sense. So then he says, and they esteem that the rewards of righteousness are to be earnestly striven for, so people should strive to fulfill the law. That's what they're saying. That's what righteousness is for a Jew. And when they sin what they have dedicated to God into the temple, they do not offer sacrifices. So in other words, they said, oh, they don't offer sacrifices, so the Christians didn't do sacrifice, so the Essenes have to be Christians, and they have to be John the Baptist worshippers. The problem is we don't know if John's people did sacrifice or not. We have no idea. They probably did, because they were breaking off from the Pharisees. People that John knew were Pharisees. The Pharisees came out to talk to him. These are people that he knew. They're like, John, you've gone crazy. You're out here wearing camel's hair thongs. What the hell's going on? You're eating what? Crickets? Oh, locusts. Oh, yeah, that's against the law, buddy. Oh, that's okay. So maybe he didn't sacrifice, but who knows? Maybe they didn't sacrifice because they thought it was better to eat these things. Were they vegetarians? We don't know. How could he be a vegetarian if he's eating locusts? Locusts are meat.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any sense. So the idea that we know so much about John the Baptist has got to be one of the most arrogant, unscholarly ways of thinking. And so then he goes further into this. This is Josephus. So they still send stuff to the temple. When does it ever say that Jesus and his disciples went to give anything to the temple? It says they paid their taxes to Caesar. It says he had Peter, get a coin out of a fish's mouth to pay something for the temple, but it doesn't say anything else like that. Mm-hmm. So we don't know exactly what that means. But here, the person that wrote this version of Josephus, he leaves a note saying it seems that by what Josephus says here, and Philo elsewhere that these Essenes did not used to go to the Jewish festivals at Jerusalem. Well, Jesus goes to all the Jewish festivals. How could he be an Essene? We don't know if John went to him or not. Well, how could he go? He was in prison. So, and they oh no, it says that they didn't go to the Jewish festivals. Yeah, right. So, but Jesus did, right? And they didn't offer sacrifices there. But Jesus goes to the sacrifice, and they eat a lamb. And so, I don't know how they come to these conclusions. And the Gnostics, they ate pig. They ate pig.
Right.
Also, don't raise questions of conscience. They were all eating pig. They didn't care. And then it says, and when they have, when they sin what they have dedicated to the temple, they don't offer sacrifice because they have more pure illustrations of their own. What are those? We don't know. On which account they are excluded from the common court of the temple. Jesus was at Solomon's porch. How could he be an Essene? You know? And they offer sacrifices, their sacrifices themselves at the court of the temple. So they do participate in sacrifice, but they, that doesn't make any sense. They do the sacrifices at their own place. Were they doing sacrifices at Qumran? Maybe in some texts. In others, they're vegetarians.
Right.
And again, we're dealing with multiple groups. So that's the kind of stuff you're dealing with. There's way more to it than that. And, they go into different things. Like at the end, he says, none of them differ from others of the Essenes in their way of living. So this is another group, but do the most resemble those Dake, which is kind of weird. It's not Doke, like the Docetists, but Dake. So if you change one letter there, suddenly they're Docetists. So they resemble those Dake who are called Poliste, dwellers of the cities. And these are the Dake are a group of Pythagoreans, interestingly enough. Also, the Docetists are accused of being Pythagorean in their lifestyle. So it seems more like these Essenes are Docetists. It doesn't seem like they're living at Qumran, but in cities. So it's possible that Essenes are the early Christians or the early Gnostics, but it's definitely not possible that they're the early Catholics or that they're these Jews at Qumran. Just doesn't really add up. Some of the texts, maybe, they have the children of light idea, but this idea that they were waiting for this war to end all wars is crazy. I mean, for the most part, the early Christians seem to be pacifists, but then again, if you go with Robert Price, it could be that, and Hyam Maccabee, that they were really just early revolutionaries and they tried to cover it up later. And it's really Marcion that's actually covering it up the most, because it's the Gospel of Luke that first tries to cover up all these ideas about Jesus being a warlord and all this stuff, which is likely what he could have been.
Yeah, that's the Jewish idea that he's a kind of this king, worldly king, Messiah, there to lead the Jews from the
and then he could be the Qumran idea.
Yeah.
But the truth is, Jesus, like Acharya S says, is all things to all people. It really, now that's the truth. He really is whatever people want him to be most of the time.
Well, it's like the Gospel of Thomas, right? I mean, you have all the disciples who are kind of like, you're like a great philosopher. You're like this, you're like that. I mean, it's kind of goes into that idea,
right?
Quite a bit.
Right, and Jesus very much was whatever people wanted him to be, and based on what Jesus was to them, that could determine what Jesus prescribed to them. In other words, if Jesus was a docetic redeemer, that could determine your theology, and from your theology could determine, well, we don't believe in atonement, we believe in the redemption of souls. Whereas if Jesus is all human, well, we believe in atonement because, they were all hung up on how his death had to relate to salvation. And, what are the things he taught? How does that pertain to salvation? Well, why did he teach this? Oh, that's because he believes the soul is separate from the body. Well, why did he teach this? Oh, well, he didn't believe the soul was separate from the body because, this and that. So It all really determines all that stuff, whether you're going to believe in a judicial atonement or some kind of docetic redemption or something that's a combination of the both, like a Christus Victor, Anselm type theory. So, a lot of that determined that, and some of their beliefs would determine their practices. Like if they believed, maybe some groups did believe the Aeons were having orgies, so they should have orgies, and that's at least that's in the eyes of the Church Fathers. So it's hard to tell what's parody, what's satire, and what's reality when you're reading these things. And I believe a lot of it is satire. I think the majority of things that the Church Fathers say, I think anyone that read them at the time knew it was satire and knew it was rhetoric, but people now read it all literally. I don't know why anyone would read Tertullian literally. Oh, that Pontic mouse, that smelly rat Marcion, who probably lived in the back cart of a trader's caravan. Or like, because no one in Pontus has any teeth because they're all rotted out. They don't know how to speak. They come from a backwater on the edge of the Roman Empire,
Yeah, it's like the multitude of Gnostics. They sprung up and then manifested like mushrooms. So maybe John Allegro was right.
Well, it's funny because Tertullian speaking to an audience that's never been to Pontus. Pontus was a sprawling city full of, rich traders and shipmasters and shipbuilders and, accountants and all this stuff. And it goes back to the time when Jason and the Argonauts went there to go find the Golden Fleece and to... that lady who's kind of like Medusa and all this stuff. That very much was a kingdom at that time. I mean, this was not some backwater on the fringes of the Roman Empire. This is not what it was. It was ruled by half Persian kings. So it's definitely not what Marcion paints it out to be. So based on archaeology and based on other texts, it's very easy to see that Marcion's saying, well, they might as well be a backwater because they're a pimple on Rome's ass for him. I'm a rich rhetorician who knew Marcus Aurelius. In all likelihood, Tertullian knew Marcus Aurelius. So he is saying, well, it doesn't compare to us,
Right.
It's very easy to see. And he was trained in rhetoric. He is a lawyer,
Yeah, definitely big on rhetoric.
I mean, I've sat in on jury cases where the prosecutor made a Simpsons joke and compared it to a thumb injury. And suddenly the whole court laughed the case out. Right. That's what rhetoric's supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to make it ludicrous, make it sound as ludicrous. If you can make a court case sound as ludicrous as The Simpsons, they'll be like, "Yeah, you're right, man. it is as ludicrous as The Simpsons. Right. Let's throw it out." But it wasn't really ludicrous. The lady had her thumb injured, and she needed money to pay for the surgery and the time out of work that she had because she was somebody that typed for a living.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big deal. This lady actually lost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because of her car getting destroyed and her thumb getting injured and, the hardship that it cost her because she couldn't afford to feed her children and things like that, So it was definitely important. But they'll do that. But yeah, there's like we were saying, politics and all that stuff has to do with all this and rhetoric and so that's what you have to deal with in scholarship and things like that. Did you want to move on to talking about? Did you want to stay on the Nag Hammadi library and Dead Sea Scrolls, or a little bit longer? Or do you want to go over something else?
I think we can kind of go over another subject. The Dead Sea Scrolls, I feel like it's kind of like reading the Old Testament. I mean, like it's just like it gets bogged down to all these little details about Jewish life.
Yeah, stupid nonsense.
Doesn't really apply to today necessarily.
Right.
But I mean, it is interesting. But
what about 7Q5? Did you want to talk about that real quick?
That one, I mean. I haven't. Which one's that again?
I mean, I could talk about it. I could tell you about it. Yeah. 7Q5, as the name indicates, if you're familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, anyone watching, 7Q means Qumran Cape 7.
Okay.
And 5 indicates that it's the 5th fragment that was found there. It's a scrap of paper, maybe about that big. It's not even really credit card size. It might even be that big. It's very small, and it is a line from the Gospel of Mark, is what people have argued. The problem hinges on one letter being a T instead of a D. which is actually what it is. It's a T. If it were a D, it would line up with the gospel mark. But the problem is that it lines up in a way where, the text goes like this, then it goes like this. Oh, but then it's indented for some stupid reason, which has nothing to do. We don't have any copies of Mark that are indented there. And it has a simple word like kai, which is and. That's the only legible word. The rest of them are kind of boggled and messed up. And one of them looks like it might say LL in or GG in, something like that. And they go, oh, well, that's Gennesaret. Which, I mean, in Greek it is, but it's all capitals in uncial, which they weren't writing in uncial at the time of Qumran. So how could it be a fragment of Mark in uncial? And why is there uncial stuff there? That's kind of weird. Why is there an uncial fragment found at Qumran? The hell's going on? The fact that it's uncial and it's at Qumran Cave 7 proves that Qumran Cave 7 doesn't date to the 1st century. Dates way later, to like the 7th century or the 4th century. And that's if you believe that they were using uncial in the 4th century. Which, really, the only proof for that is the Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and, the 5 or 4 great codices, which are on vellum, which a lot of the Qumran stuff is on vellum. And some of the Qumran stuff agrees with the Cairo Geniza, which is from the 10th century or 8th century or something like that. So there's a lot of problems in dating. The dating views are not based on scientific evidence. They're not based on that. Dating is based on paleography, which is looking at not paleography, but paleography, I guess is how you would say it. But it's based on the idea of what writing style is it in and what time period does that match to, based on extra canonical or extra biblical sourcing. You know what I mean? And then they have other dates. Like, you always hear people bring up carbon dating. They don't use carbon dating to date text. I'm going to tell you right now, no text is ever carbon dated. It's complete nonsense. There's other types of dating, though. And most texts are dated based on the writing style. And this is the whole writing style thing is completely theoretical, because we have almost nothing that's extra biblical that dates to these time periods. Most of the stuff we have, like Josephus and stuff like that, is from the 10th century. So there are no, and I'm not encouraging anyone to become a hardcore flamenco worshiper, any more than I would encourage you to be a hardcore Sitchin worshiper. But you're going to come across facts like that, and sometimes they lead to radical conclusions. But they also the same facts that lead to the radical conclusions lead to the most conservative conclusions. And so you've got the conservative camp who says, well, Mark and Matthew, they wrote a little while after Jesus died. So they wrote between 33 and 50 AD, and that's the Orthodox camp. Then you have the unorthodox camp, which typically goes, well, most of the stuff was written in the mid-2nd century.
Right. And
then you have people that might be a mix between the two and say, oh, well, around the end of the Jewish War, this stuff was being written, So you're going to come across different, dating, all this stuff. But, I think we should move on from the Nag Hammadi library and the Dead Sea Scrolls to really maybe go into, I don't know. I like all the apocryphal stuff. The Dead Sea Scrolls is concerned with that. What about Jewish apocrypha? Like Ascension of Isaiah is Christian apocrypha, but it's also kind of Jewish. And then you got secret stuff that's on Moses, and you got stuff like that. What's your take on the apocrypha? What apocryphal books do you like? What do you find useful in it, or interesting?
Apocrypha, basically means secret, or it's just not. It's something that's not really included in the canon.
Right. Basically the kind of the hidden things, the hidden books.
Yeah. They don't necessarily mean Gnostic. They just
right. Exactly.
A lot of people make that mistake in saying that. Yeah. Well, although this apocryphal book, it must be a Gnostic.
Right. Which is what you'll find in the. There's a book called The Lost Books of the Bible. That's the exact title, and you're going to find that idea in there. They think that because the Ebionites used texts that we don't have now, that they're Gnostic. which they're not Gnostic at all. They're Jewish. And so you'll find things like that where people will say that. And so there are books that are that whole book is full of apocrypha, and so they automatically conclude that everything's Gnostic. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas, the Infancy Gospel of James. The Infancy Gospel of James was never used by Gnostics. It was used by Catholics, and still is. All their ideas come out of it. They just don't actually use. They don't physically use the book. But you'll find that every single Catholic apologist that you'll come across on YouTube will use quotes from the Gospel of James or things from the Gospel of James, or they'll use the Gospel of James as proof that someone believed this and that. So, while it is not used by the church officially, it is very much used by the church unofficially.
Well, my favorite apocryphal text, my personal favorite, was probably the Wisdom of Solomon. I mean, it's not necessarily Gnostic or what have you, but it is very interesting in the sense that it doesn't really use all this terminology that people like Saint Augustine likes to throw around, and like as far as like original sin and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's very it has a kind of, there's some sort of a Gnostic flavor to it. Like I can read one, for example. It says, "Wisdom it was who kept guard over the first father of the human race when he alone had yet been made. She saved him after his fall and gave him the strength to master all things." I mean, it kind of used a little bit of a kind of Gnostic ideas.
You notice that, wisdom is masculine there.
Yeah. That's kind of interesting. The kind of.
What's funny though is masculine. The whole idea of feminine and masculine actually, most scholars will take it too far. I thoroughly believe for the Gnostics that none of the Syzygies are female or male until the Manichaeans come along. But that theory is pretty sketchy because the same word that means brethren or sisters is never given any kind of sense of whether it's masculine or feminine. Generations can be feminine or masculine, but they never use anything feminine or masculine with it. Names are the same way, but names are typically determined whether they're feminine or masculine by the end of the name, like the suffix and stuff like that. Sophia, feminine. But then you could say, oh, well, for a Jew, Sophia, if you heard it that way, oh man, well, that's masculine because Yah is masculine.
Right.
So this idea of masculine, feminine, I don't think ever occurred to these people at all. I really don't. I don't think when they heard Sophia, they made it, masculine or feminine. Some of these words some of the aeons become masculine in Latin for Tertullian. And that's why he said, well, I want to explain it in Greek so you can understand.
Well, I mean, like Sophia, though, like in the Apocrypha on John, she definitely has some feminine aspects to her. Like, she's
right, the feminine aspect that she produced an abortion.
Yeah, an abortion.
But is that really you have to really question, is that really a feminine aspect?
Yeah,
because all the aeons begot.
Right. They're basically
and they begot in pairs, right?
They're actually hermaphroditic.
Right.
Beings. They're not
exactly
male or female. They're just like androgynous.
Right. It comes from this masculine, this construct in our head that, well, only women give birth. Well, they're not talking about a literal carnal birth, though, is where you're coming to the problem, That's why, Paul, like when Paul talks, he says, he talks to people about, I speak to you about things in the flesh and this and that. Even the Gospel of Philip has stuff like that. I speak to you with human words, that you can conceive based on material things, but I don't speak of the things of the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
He was basically saying, I'm giving you illustrations that you can relate to because you're in matter. It's the only way you can possibly come close to conceiving the incomprehensible. And it's the same thing when we're dealing with quantum physics and things like that. Because of quantum physics, or because of the internet and computers, we're able to conceive of the idea of quantum physics a little bit better in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. It's beginning to make a little bit more sense because we have the computer and programming and stuff like that to illustrate these quantum physics concepts. So they were very much limited by language, as we are now.
Right.
And gender and the gender, neuter gender, feminine or masculine gender, was something that they got hung up on. But I don't think the Gnostics were saying, "Oh yeah, this was a male and a female having sex, and they gave birth to this and that."
Yeah, it's figurative language. It's like kind of mytho-poetic language. Not really.
Right.
We take it literal as Christ was doing it with Sophia back in the Ogdoad. I mean, like, it's not.
Right.
We can't take that as completely literal.
Which is probably why Justin Martyr had to make the defense that they about sex and having angels not having dicks and all this stuff.
Right.
We have stuff like that. What secret stuff do you like though? That's specifically like Jewish or Christian, not stuff that's necessarily Gnostic. Like, there's books out there. Like there's Josephus, what he talks about with Moses, and then you have Philo talking about Adam and Eve and Seth and Cain. And you have the Ascension of Isaiah or Assumption of Moses or Book of Jasher. What stuff do you like from that?
Yeah, I definitely like the Ascension of Isaiah. I think that even the Cathars really like that text.
What do you like about it?
I mean, that has a very strong docetic flavor to that one text.
What is docetic about it?
It does talk about how Christ kind of descended back from the spheres of the angels, and he kind of entered into matter, and it's very it definitely has a strong flavor to it. I mean, I don't remember everything off the top of my head about.
Does it actually say Christ?
I believe. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure. I have to get back to you on that one.
You should pull it up on earlyjewishwritings.com and check it real quick. I'm interested to find out. I haven't read the full Ascension of Isaiah for a long time, and it was actually before I was ever a Gnostic, so that I read it. I'd be interested to find out what exactly it says. I know it's a work that the scholars proclaim is definitely Christian apocrypha.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the idea of Isaiah being sawed in half, right? Right. Which kind of ties into where Jesus goes, "Oh, you killed all the prophets," and
it says Jesus the Lord Christ. That's how they find. It does mention the word Christ.
So, can you quote it where it talks about this descending into matter? I'd be curious to find out exactly how it phrases it.
Let me look it up 1 second. Let's see. Wow, I wish I could. I should have done this earlier. Let's see. All right, here we go.
I'm gonna prepare better for the future videos. I think we got lucky that we did the first one so well without preparation, with a lot of preparation.
Yeah. And it says, "And I said to the angel who was with me, for the glory of my appearance was undergoing transformation as I ascended to each heaven in turn. Nothing of the vanity of the world is here."
Who is me introduced as, though, in the subject?
I think that's Christ who's talking.
So it just says Christ or Jesus Christ, or is it Christ? I'm just curious how it would actually give it.
All right, hold on 1 second. Let me one more time. Hold on. Appearance, vanity. Hold on. Vanity. Yeah, it just says the word I. It just refers to I.
Okay.
It just keeps repeating I and I. Yeah.
So read it again.
It says, "And I said to the angel who was with me, for the glory of my appearance was undergoing transformation as I ascended to each heaven in turn. Nothing."
Just like the descent.
Yeah. "Nothing of the vanity of that world is here named." So it's just we see that idea of Docetism right again in this apocryphal text. I mean, it's amazing. I keep seeing the same.
It's so weird. Shedding my likeness as I went up into the heavens reminds me of a space shuttle, like dropping off its thrusters and all this shit.
Right.
It's so weird. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. It does sound a lot like the descent myths,
Right, like it's kind of like the treatise of Seth, where you have Christ in. He's like he claims that he was in the mouth of the lions, and he had to deceive the powers and to
Right.
take on their form and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it kind of repeats again.
So, how do you think it's possible that this idea that Isaiah was sawed in half? Do you think that might have any parallels in the Dead Sea Scrolls?
That Isaiah was taught in half. That's
Mm-hmm.
a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure about that.
Because I think there might be some Isaiah apocryphons in there. Actually, the Dead Sea Scrolls, what it's known for, is being loaded with alternate Old Testament stuff on Moses and all the prophets and all kinds of stuff. It's almost all apocryphon, like re-realized alternate reality Old Testament stuff.
Right. I kind of feel like in our next video, I think we should talk about address the subject of dualism and how.
Well, I'd say let's just do some stuff on dualism right now. What
right now, or
yeah,
because,
shoot for it. Why not?
Because Docetism pretty much kind of goes.
Let's just wrap it up with dualism.
Yeah,
let's just make
maybe,
that
maybe.
I don't even want to. Let's not even go over what our. We'll talk about what our next subject is off camera.
Yeah.
But because I'm not sure on what that's going to be yet. I want it to be something we can research and get some notes together on, and we could split up the work, and then maybe by next week or the week after we could do a podcast on it.
Yeah. But when we talk about Gnostic dualism, what do you think that means? Like, there's a lot of confusion of what dualism means.
Gnostic dualism. Okay, first I'm going to go over what dualism is more of a formal definition or understanding of the idea of dualism. The idea of dualism is that two equally opposed forces, powers, people, or a protagonist and antagonist, they're equally in opposition to each other and you stand an equal chance at winning. In other words, good versus evil, Ahriman versus Ahura Mazda type of idea. Now that's more of a Zoroastrian idea. It's something that gets injected into Manichaeism somewhere around the early to mid 3rd century. That's the time of Mani.
Right.
This is happening in Seleucia, I think, and in Syria and Armenia and stuff like that, and the Persian domain. But there's different ideas that get called dualist as well. There's the idea that like the spirit-flesh dichotomy. Oh, flesh is opposed to spirit. Oh, that's dualism. The formal definition of dualism, the one I went over first, you don't find that in Gnosticism. I mean, you might find it. It's questionable whether you find it in anything. It might be in Zoroastrianism. I don't think it's in Manichaeism. I don't think they believe that evil stood as. I don't think any Christian or Gnostic system believed that evil even stood a chance of surviving.
Right.
I'm pretty sure they all, even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, all these belief systems affirmatively believe that God cannot be defeated. They may have different beliefs on what God is or isn't, but they all believe that God can't be defeated. So in Zoroastrianism, though, you have Ahriman is definitely waging an evil or equal contest with the Ahura Mazda.
Well, Gnostic dualism doesn't really deal with the first principle.
Right.
It's really a monistic religion. I mean, it talks about how pretty much to the Gnostics, everything pretty much ultimately proceeded to God, even though everything was like, well, not directly from God, but there's basically intermediaries or
right. And Marcion gets accused of dualism, but I'm not so sure there's ever any. Dualism is strange to me because I've read a lot of patristic literature from the first 4 centuries. I mean, that's one of the things I've read the most of. Yeah, or the genres, and they don't talk about dualism. I've never come across it.
Yeah, but I also think that people kind of could get that confused to say, well, if the Gnostics were monistic, then maybe they were pantheistic, or
I think the whole concept of dualism is useless to Gnostic scholarship. I think it's useless altogether. It doesn't tell you anything. The idea that there's spirit and flesh, like there's a tripartite division of substances, is actually the tripartite division is way more important. I think that should be looked at more than dualism.
Yeah, it's the three principles. Really, it's not really. That's what the Gnostics really believed in.
Right. Well, the idea that there's Dualism is also the idea that there was two first principles. Well, that comes from the materialist school. It's the idea that there was hydrogen and helium and stuff like this and blah blah blah. Two first principles for what? For what? Material existence? The Gnostics would look at you cross-eyed. They'd be like, well, which part of the tripartite division are we talking about? The intermediate state, the state of matter, or the state of spirit? Like,
I mean,
so that's what it complicates.
Well, there's definitely a division of spirit and matter in Gnostic religion. I mean, that comes from Plato.
That's what gets called dualism all the time.
Yeah, that's the I guess the dualism you call it that the Gnostics believed in, but they didn't believe in two powers that are equally opposed to each other. That's
right. And Marcion seems to be the prime target for the idea of dualism, and Manny. They'll say Marcion was a dualist because he believed in Satan and God. Well, then a Roman Catholic's a dualist. Or he was a dualist because he believed in a Demiurge and a higher God, which is Jesus. Right. So he's a dualist. Well, then why does he believe in Satan still? Oh, because Satan is the higher God. Well, Marcion never said that Satan was the Demiurge necessarily. He didn't even necessarily believe in the Demiurge.
Yeah, like to the Gnostics, there is no. I mean, like you can think of it as like a horizontal kind of thing. Like you have spirit and matter, right?
Right.
But they don't really. But they see it as separate, but at the same time, they don't see as dark and light as this perfectly symmetrical kind of division, like yin and yang.
Yeah, well, the division for Paul is we see Paul states his dualism, if that's what we're going to call it, if we're going to be confined to that term. He states it when he says we see through a glass darkly, but then we will see face to face. That is dualism, if you want to sum it up in a nutshell. I mean, it's the idea like looking into a ripple in the water. It's like Narcissus looking at the water and he sees his reflection. Or you look in a mirror and you see a reflection. The idea was that on the other side of the water, the water is the veil that separates this carnal physical reality from the spiritual reality. And the face that's on the water looks like your face, but it's really just a projection of you. Oh, but then it inverts that idea. You are the projection.
Right.
Matter's the projection of the pleroma, and it comes to think it's not. It thinks it's the reflection in the mirror or the reflection in the water. I mean, the reflection in the water is the spirit. That's the spiritual reality. Yeah, you still have a form, but you're not a 3D form. You're this 2D, light image. Is basically what it is.
We could see the dualism more as kind of a rigorous affirmation of the transcendent realm. That's right. That's where they really.
I would really argue that, if you're going to call that dualism, sure, the Gnostics are
dualists, but
I guess if you use that as if that's what dualism is, which I don't know. I mean, a lot of people describe dualism as that. It's not actually the formal definition in scholarship,
right. But I think, when we use that to kind of like make a distinction between spirit and matter, and Gnostics would be.
I'm more a fan of, like I said, the tripartite division of substance.
A lot of them, they all pretty much believe that. I mean, and of course the Sethians kind of had the idea of the Cain and Abel and Seth.
Right. Because under the formal definition of dualism, it's the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox who are the dualists.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not so much the Orthodox, but definitely the Roman Catholics, because that's why they believe in all this exorcism stuff and
like
blah,
Satan
blah.
being kind of like it seems like even in Protestant and Catholic,
it almost seems like Satan has a better chance of winning in the Protestant and Roman Catholic theology.
Like Satan is pretty much like God always has a hard time with Satan. Like
right, but with the Gnostics and the Eastern Orthodox, it's like God already triumphed on the cross.
Yeah.
That's where we agree, but I don't think there's a conflict. Like a lot of people think there's a good-evil conflict, like Zoroastrianism and stuff like that. I think the conflict is an illusion. I think the whole thing's an illusion. Like that, to me, seems to be the Gnostic message.
Like strictly speaking, they weren't really Gnostic. I mean, sorry, not Gnostic, dualist.
And actually, if you want to go so far as to say, here's what I'll say to you, and you could say it's equal or not. I mean, if you believe in the apokatastasis and the restoration of Sophia, then it's probably not. But the idea is that here and now, what we think is here and now, what we believe is here and now, evil wins if you believe that the flesh is deficient and the cosmos is deficient, evil wins in the cosmos all the time and has to win until it's destroyed. See, in the end, the pleroma, the fullness swallows up the emptiness, you know. But the thing is that at this present time, well, you know, anything pneumatic wins in the pleroma because there is nothing non-pneumatic there. But anything in this realm has a bit of pneumatic, you know, energy in it, and it doesn't win unless it escapes. So it wins when it dies. And also, so if you really look at it in the Gnostic perspective, it can't even be dualist in the formal sense because at the same time the evil wins when you die, it wins because you died. But you win because you escaped the body. So it's all win-win situation for everybody. You know?
But I think there's a danger in saying that, you know, since the Gnostics aren't dualists, that they must be pantheists or panentheists, which I don't think
I think a lot of them are panentheists.
Panentheists? Like, well I don't
oh,
think
yeah.
They're pantheists in the sense that...
They're definitely not pantheists.
But as far as, like, panentheism, I mean...
Yeah.
Isn't that basically the belief that everything is under God, or I think God is basically transcendent over the material world?
I have to look up the formal... I don't know what the formal definition is. Let me look. Panentheism is... you know, the problem is panentheism is kind of this idea that Protestants that can't come to Gnosticism, they can come to panentheism. Because Gnostics definitely aren't full-on panentheists. Like, the problem is see, for a Gnostic, if you told a Gnostic, are you a Docetist, are you a Gnostic, they tell you no, because they say terms in the world are deceptive. The world's an illusion. So it's if I'm a Docet, okay, whatever. That's because the problem is with terms is that people don't have the proper understandings of them. That's why dualism, it hurts Gnostic scholarship more than it helps it. Even the word Gnostic kind of, some camps think hurts scholarship more. But I think Gnostic is useful. I think panentheist and dualist is kind of useless.
Well, I don't like any of these terms, but I kind of think that panentheism is kind of like a more radical version of pantheism, really, because they both basically say that everything is potentially and actually is God.
Well, what it says is that it's the idea that the divine interpenetrates every part of nature. In that sense, yeah, Valentinus is definitely a panentheist. He believes that divinity goes into the intermediate nature and the or at least when it comes to the nature of reality, not the nature of your body or what kind of person you are. You're not. This isn't saying, oh, you're a hylic or a psychic or a pneumatic. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the tripartite division of substance. So in other words, that's the Trinity for Valentinus. So there's the, you could say it's the pneumatic nature, but it's pleromatikos, pleromatic nature. Okay, so the divine nature. Then there's the intermediate nature, and then there's the material nature. These are the substance is the better way to say it. So these are the substances. Well, God does interact in the intermediate nature, but he also interacts in a sense with the material realm in the sense that he's present in the material realm. So yeah, you could say, okay, we're panentheists, but you could say that all Christians are panentheists in that aspect. Well, it's not very informative there. But it goes on further. Not only does he interpenetrate every part of nature and timelessly extends beyond it, but they have other things that they say that, because pan is all, right?
Right.
But panentheism means all in God. Well, the problem is that it's supposed to mean God in all, not all in God. See, the idea that everyone's in God, if that is what panentheism is, then no, Gnostics are not panentheists. Because Gnostics don't believe that God is necessarily in everything. We don't believe that in a hylic-natured person has anything divine in them. You know, some of them might believe that it can be awakened, and some might believe it's not there. That differs among Gnostics. To actually say a Gnostic is a panentheist or a pantheist, they're definitely not pantheists. But to say that they're panentheists or they're dualists or they're monists or any of this stuff, I don't think they're any of them.
But I don't think it's really a uniform theology. I think it's definitely different.
Well, I don't think those terms can be used for Gnosticism because the thing is that in the Gnostic worldview, Gnostics believe that there's a pleroma and a kenoma. Those views, panentheism is a canonic view. Pantheist is a canonic view. Dualist, monist, it's the belief that there's one first principle, there's two first principles, 3, 55, 365, whatever. That's what those beliefs are. Pantheism is polytheism. Right? Oh, well, that's the belief that we should worship multiple gods. It's the belief that there are multiple gods. Oh, monotheism is the belief there's one God. No, it's not. Right. Monotheists, all the early Christian apologists believe that there's 300-something gods. They firmly believe it. And they say those are the gods of the nations. All the Jews believe there are multiple gods. They believe they existed. The Old Testament believes Asherah exists. That's why you shouldn't worship her, because she's existing and she's evil. And she's going to lead you down the wrong path. So, they're all useless. They're useless terms because, if we're gonna redefine dualism and say it's the idea that there's a konoma and pleroma, okay, Gnostics are dualists. Right. That's as far as I would go.
Right. Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that part. They were definitely not.
Because the difference between the Gnostics and everybody else, and this I'm going to say it right now, the difference between a Gnostic and everybody else, every other religion, is that we truly believe there's a spiritual realm and a physical realm. Protestants don't believe that. Catholics don't believe that. They have this ushy-gushy feeling where they go, oh yeah, it's heaven. No, heaven's the sky.
Right.
That is what Uranos in Greek means, sky. And it's also a pagan god. Okay? So, they don't talk about pagan gods in the New Testament? Yeah, they do. Uranos. He's the original god.
Sky god.
Yeah. He's Anu of the Sumerians. Or he might be Cronus, whatever. Right. Father Time, Daddy in the Sky, the Reaper, Santa Claus. That's Uranos, really, essentially. It's definitely the idea that our physical bodies will fly. The rapture is the idea that your physical body is going to fly into the sky. It's not the idea that you're going to be, this and that. The idea of heaven is that we go to some other realm that's actually a physical realm in our body. And that's why they say no one has gone into heaven, save yada, 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 yada. Because Elijah was sucked up in a whirlwind or a tornado into the sky. Now, they don't say that about Enoch. Enoch just says he was here and then he was gone because God took him. Right. It didn't say he took him into the sky. But a whole idea, mythology, arose around the idea of Enoch. Well, if he took Elijah, he must have took Enoch. Well, and Marvin Meyer talks about that, or did.
Yeah, it's like most, a lot of these apocalyptic Christians, nowadays they see that they figure they'll be raptured out of the world by Christ based on First Thessalonians, right?
Right.
But before the 7-year tribulation of the Antichrist in Revelation. But they're basically cramming two contradictory eschatologies together.
Right, so but rapture is definitely not something that was invented by Protestants. And there's people that will tell you different apologists. This is an apologist trick. Never listen to apologists. Don't even listen to anything he says. Whether they say anything factual or not, it's surrounded by 99 unfactual things. 99% misinformation, 1% fact. That's what apologetics is. Stay away from it. It's a waste of your time. And so what they'll, the rapture, they'll tell you, oh, well, that didn't exist, or a Catholic apologist will say that. Well, that's nonsense. The rapture belief very well did exist and has existed forever. It's always, all the ideas that we have now have been around since the dawn of time. Everything. There's nothing new. That's why Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. Everything is a repeat. Because everything is a repeat. Computer technology was probably around at one point. Everything is a repeat. The idea that mankind has evolved, no, mankind's changed.
Right.
But it's still a repeat of something that's happened before. Because that, especially for a Gnostic, reality and, the past and the present are all happening, all this shit's happening at the same time. You just don't see it. Even in the Old Testament, there's chariots of fire coming out of the mountain. No one sees it but Elijah. Because Elijah was given the eyes to see and the ears to hear. That's essentially what the Gnostic is the one that has eyes to see and ears to hear. You see things that other people don't see. You hear things that other people don't hear. Are you schizophrenic? Nope. You function like a normal person. You might be eccentric. You function like anybody else, there's all kinds of different ways you can look at those. Oh, you could say, oh, well, this is the chariots of the gods, and this is this, and that. It's very easy to extract crazy fictional ideas from the Old Testament, but also the idea that everything's a repeat. The rapture is something that it's possible that the Cerinthians believed in a rapture. It's possible that the ancient Egyptians believed in a rapture. It's possible that the Pharisees believed in a rapture. It depends on whether they were an Epicurean or not. You know what I mean? If they subscribed to an Epicurean philosophy, they might believe that this rapture was physical. Mm-hmm. They very well did believe your soul goes into the sky. The Egyptians believed that. Right. Now, if you're your soul, then your body goes into the sky. Well, there's a rapture. The rapture is all over ancient religion. It's all over the place. But in the Protestant sense, that there's going to be a rapture, and then you're going to, then there's going to be torture for everyone else, and then you're going to come back down. That's just definitely not something that's promoted by the Bible. It's not even promoted by Thessalonians or Revelation. Doesn't work that way. That's their basically their way of reading it. Revelation has the idea of a general resurrection, and it has nothing about a rapture in it. So what they're doing is they're mixing texts. Now, mixing Revelation with 2 Thessalonians, I don't remember which of the Thessalonians had the rapture. I don't know if you do. Do you remember?
I think it's 1 Thessalonians.
Okay, yeah. Mixing 2 Thessalonians and Revelation was a common practice of the church fathers in the 2nd century. Those texts were companion texts. 2 Thessalonians is merely a commentary on Revelation. That's what it is. 1 Thessalonians, because 2 Thessalonians has the man of sin, right? 1 Thessalonians, which is another thing that ties into Qumran theories for Eisenman, but 1 Thessalonians is the one that they claim. 1 Thessalonians is kind of interesting because that's the one that they claim, a lot of people claim was the first letter Paul wrote, actually. And if you're going to follow the Orthodox belief, it would have to be the first letter he wrote. If you're going to follow the book of Acts, then he wrote that first. The problem is it's clear that he didn't write that first. 1 Corinthians and Galatians are the most likely candidates to be his first letters, and Romans. Based on the Marcionite prologues, you would come to the idea that 1 Thessalonians was the first letter, and based on Acts, you'll come to that if you put those together. 1 Thessalonians is the only writing out of all of Paul's writings that actually I don't believe that it's by Paul at all. It's the only one where I'm damn sure it's not by Paul. I'm 100% sure it's not by Paul. And one of those reasons is that in all of Paul's letters where it says someone died, okay, the Savior died, right? The Savior figure that's dying. Right. It says Christ died. It never says Jesus died. 1 Thessalonians is the only letter by Paul that hasn't been changed to say Christ died. It says Jesus died. It's the only one. Look through all of them. I guarantee it. Jesus died. It's the only place where it ever says it in the whole New Testament. Directly, verbatim, Jesus died for our sins or whatever it's saying, Now, that's the reason I think it wasn't written by Paul, because they had already sanitized all his texts. So by the time they wrote 1 Thessalonians, they're like, oh, well, we've sanitized them all. Let's just put Jesus died. No Gnostic would ever use this anyway. It's got nothing in it.
Right.
And so, boom, they write it last, and they make it the cover letter for the whole collection.
Well, maybe in our next episode we should talk about the Book of Revelation and how it
Ooh, fun topic.
Kind of see it. Yeah, I mean, it's not really in the news necessarily, but I probably will pretty soon with all this meteorites and popes and.
Oh, I'll give our viewers some crazy flamenco stuff and. Yeah. Some stuff from Pagels and maybe even some stupid David Icke crap. Who knows? Yeah. There's all kinds of interesting stuff we could do on Revelation. Well, we could go over Revelation 12 too.
Yeah, then we can go to like the Crowley stuff and how he's kind of the Antichrist, and it's like it's a big.
We could go over Savonarola.
Yeah,
that'll be fun.
It'll be great.
All right, yeah, let's do some stuff on maybe we could do a couple on Revelation in a row.
Yeah, I think it might be interesting. I think we could like stick to one topic, and then we can just kind of roll from there.
Yeah, we'll just do Revelation for a couple episodes, couple weeks, and maybe a month. Who knows? We'll go into Revelation. We'll try to bust it wide open on flamenco and different theories like that, and then we'll look at we can look at Pagel's Book of Revelations. which she wrote. We can go over that. And I don't know, anything you can find out. Just bring some information next time, and I'll bring some stuff and we'll go over it. That'd be great.
Yeah. Should be fun.
Alrighty. Let's see. Yeah, I need to make an outro for these. I don't have one.
Well, that'll be our outro.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to Aeon Arcanum Gnostic Podcast. This February is the 21st in the year of our Demiurge 2013. And we are not sponsored by archontic entities, nor do we accept sacrifices. And that will be the end of our show. Join us next time for some insights into the Book of Revelation, and we'll probably be doing that for a couple weeks. I don't know what day it'll be up, but maybe next Thursday we'll have one up. Wednesday, somewhere around there. All right. Peace.